Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to dive into the breakdown of the PMP Exam 7th edition syllabus. The exam currently uses the 6th edition screen guide, along with the 7th edition screen guide, and the 7th edition exam outline for evaluation. Now, the exam as a whole is divided into 3 scoring modules. The first module focuses on people, the second on process, and the third on business environment. Each module is weighted differently. The personnel section makes up 42% of the exam. It consists of 76 questions. The process section accounts for 50%, with 90 questions. The business environment section is much smaller, comprising only 8%, with 14 questions. In total, the exam has 180 questions. Let's now examine the content of the business environment section in the exam syllabus. Now, about the business environment syllabus. It only covers 4 key points. Just 4, that's it. Let's go through them together. When it comes to the business environment, the first key point is crucial. It's about why we take on projects. We don't just do them blindly. They must create business value. As we've already discussed, value can be both tangible and intangible. It's the sum of both types. Collectively, these factors help us determine that a project is worthwhile. In many cases, the value of a project isn't created during its execution, but rather after it's finished, when it's put into operation and used. That's when it truly creates value. In our discussion of the business environment section, there's another crucial term we need to highlight. It's called compliance. So what exactly is compliance? In simple terms, it means following the rules and regulations. Essentially, compliance is about not breaking any rules or laws. That's what compliance boils down to. Now, if a project doesn't comply, it clearly shouldn't be in operation. On the other hand, if it's compliant, or even operating in a borderline area, how can we implement certain operations to make sure it's compliant? Of course, the exam won't be this complex, but you should at least know that your actions must be compliant. Another thing is, companies actually go through this kind of change. The old way of doing things, if it's no longer working, they might come up with new approaches. This leads to driving organizational change. It's actually projects that drive organizational change. As projects are completed one after another, they can spark organizational transformation. However, there's a crucial point to understand. Project managers themselves aren't in a position to directly lead these changes due to their relatively junior position in the organization, but they can still facilitate organizational change. Regarding the PMP exam, business environment knowledge isn't tested in great depth. A general grasp is enough. Let's dive in. So, what are the 4 key points in our assessment criteria? First up is compliance. This covers ensuring our project planning is compliant and managing overall project compliance. Let's break this term down a bit. When we're managing a project, especially in the planning stage, compliance should be our top priority. You know, Professor Louis Young once said that the most lucrative projects are all listed in the criminal code, meaning they're usually not exactly legal. When undertaking a project, consider this. Ensuring project compliance is crucial. This encompasses various aspects, including safety and health. These factors primarily involve legal and regulatory compliance, but also emphasize sustainable development. This approach ensures profitability while preserving the environment, safeguarding user interests, and protecting employee welfare. Compliance is a key requirement here. This means we need to ensure safety standards are met. Health considerations are also crucial. All of these aspects have specific standards and requirements. Secondly, we need to classify different types of compliance. These categories might encompass various elements. There's a concept we frequently discuss. It's called the triple bottom line. In any project, it should not only be profitable, but also environmentally friendly. Regarding environmental impact, there are various ways to categorize these concerns. Another key point is avoiding harm to individuals or to society at large. This encompasses the safety of workers, as well as the project's users, including the end users of the product or service. We're essentially categorizing compliance into different potential areas of concern. We also need to identify compliance risks. In other words, we need to pinpoint what could go wrong. This might result in breaking compliance rules. If there are any practices that could lead to non-compliance, we need to eliminate them or address them immediately. We should use suitable strategies to ensure compliance. We must ensure our projects meet standards and legal requirements. Also, if we fail to comply, we need to understand the implications and consequences of non-compliance. In fact, have you ever wondered why some people nowadays choose to engage in questionable activities? What drives them to break the law? It's simple. The consequences of lawbreaking are too lenient. If they played by the rules, they might feel like they're missing out on something. They'd rather push the boundaries. Now, if our legal system enforced stricter penalties For these offenses, we need to examine the implications carefully. What happens if we don't follow the rules? So we need to be really careful about this. Okay, next step is figuring out how to meet compliance requirements and the steps we need to take. Basically, we need to get a grip on all the potential risks and any relevant laws and all that legal stuff. We gotta learn how to comply. Then we check how well we're following the rules. In theory, we should be playing by the book. We aim to be profitable while protecting the environment and ensuring no harm to stakeholders or causing undue impact. We'll adhere to regulations and stay within legal boundaries. This is our primary business principle. Operate in full compliance and ensure project-wide adherence. Our second principle: assess and deliver project value, focusing on tangible advantages, benefits. When undertaking a project, it must create value to be worthwhile. But first, let's analyze the project, its value and benefits for the client, and for ourselves, what we stand to gain. We need to be clear about this. So, we've identified through investigation these mutual benefits and values. Okay, so, to ensure long-term profitability, we need to finalize all agreements. In other words, what steps should we take to make sure both parties reach a win-win situation? They profit, and we profit. It's a profitable outcome for all. Moreover, our customers can also reap the rewards. Given this scenario, we need to determine who to partner with. In terms of partnerships, we might need agreements with binding clauses. Ensure a tracking system exists to monitor our profits, though this rarely happens. Typically, the benefits of our projects only materialize at a specific stage. It's after the project's completion, when it's been implemented and operational, that we start seeing returns. So what do we call this process? The post-evaluation system. Now, this post-evaluation system isn't something we usually deal with during project execution. That's because the PMP exam primarily covers during the pre-delivery phase of the project. But as you know, someone needs to take charge. So who's in charge? Typically, it's the product manager. We're talking about a product manager who has a broader focus on the entire product lifecycle. They oversee the product post-completion, and throughout its implementation, they monitor the product's performance and benefits using established metrics and systems. Let's move on to the next point. Let's talk about evaluating different delivery options and how we can prove their worth. In other words, there are often multiple ways to tackle a task. We need to understand what each approach offers in terms of value and cost. This is what we often call ROI, or return on investment. Or to put it another way, when I take on a task, is it worth it or not? When I do something in this project, or take certain actions, is it appropriate? This is what we mean by evaluating the delivery of a potential solution and its value. Finally, one more thing about assessing how value is gained by the involved parties. In other words, as we work on our project, we aim to generate value and may go to great lengths to secure stakeholder involvement. We strive to enhance their support for the project while minimizing any resistance. It's crucial to assess whether, in our value creation process, the actions of stakeholders are aligned with our project objectives. Let's push ahead. Overall, it all comes down to value. A project must generate value to be worthwhile. If it's not valuable, it's simply not worth doing. Okay. The third point, assessing the business landscape. It's saying that we must evaluate and tackle these challenges. Shifting business landscape. How far it reaches. What's that about? It means we're working in a fluid environment, you see. In this changing world, not everything can stay the same as when you kicked off the project. But lots of offsite stuff keeps shifting and evolving. This covers various legal requirements, political influences, market dynamics, and evolving infrastructure. You might be familiar with a term called PESEL analysis or macroenvironmental analysis. It's crucial to grasp how these macro factors are changing and their impact on our current projects. However, being in a remote area, you don't actually need to do all this stuff, like all that big picture analysis or whatever. The point is, you should be mindful that maybe we need to look beyond just the project itself. There are outside factors that could impact our work. We need to keep an eye on those too. That's the idea, anyway. So, his first point is this: assess shifts in the external business landscape. What tech advancements have we seen? Any changes in regulations, politics, or what we call geopolitics? We're talking about local political climates or regional political dynamics. Are there any factors that could affect our project? We must gauge these external influences. That's our first consideration. Next step, responding to market shifts. Let's assess the project and its potential effects, then prioritize accordingly. Or we can evaluate how it affects our tasks and set their priorities. We've just covered two approaches. But why separate them? Well, here's the reason. Remember, we talked about assessing external changes and their impact on the project. This applies to predictive project management. When external factors change, our project landscape and project requirements, implementing these changes may present new challenges. Another relevant concept is backlog items, which is commonly used in Agile project management. This methodology embraces change, particularly in sectors like web development and software engineering, where rapid changes are the norm. We must be ready to embrace change. Regarding the impact on our to-do list, we must consider external factors. These factors affect our current projects. To put it simply, in other words, we need to consider external changes in our industry to evaluate their impact on our work and ongoing projects. Then we can decide how to adjust our priorities accordingly. There's a crucial point to consider. We need to be absolutely clear about this. When setting priorities for all our tasks, it's always in the context of limited resources. Given these constraints, what should I tackle first? What comes second? And what follows? The same principle applies here. When faced with limited resources and multiple tasks to handle, what should I address first? First, the most crucial task. Then, the next priority. Finally, the least urgent. This creates a priority sequence. We base this on external factors to evaluate their impact on us. This allows us to make informed decisions or develop solutions. We determine what to address first, then what follows. And lastly, the third priority, a data-driven approach to scope adjustments. Tweaking the project scope. Scope changes may impact budget, potentially delay timelines, strain resource allocation. Let's examine this. When external factors change, we may need to consider adjusting our project parameters. How should we adapt or revise our action items? These are still our responsibilities. One approach is predictive, while the other is agile. Essentially, these are our tasks. As for the content itself, we might need to make some adjustments. What we call the scientific approach is basically a plan B. Alright. Finally, we need to constantly monitor the business environment to assess its impact on our project, or how ongoing tasks affect the project. This means all research and analysis isn't just a one-time thing, but an ongoing process. As long as you're working on a project, it's always part of a larger social context. Within the social framework, as you carry out your work, changes in the external environment occur. They'll inevitably affect your project. As we all know, we each work for a company. A company's operations exist within a specific industry. This industry, in turn, belongs to a larger, overarching ecosystem, known as the business environment. If this microenvironment changes, it affects the entire industry. This industry-wide impact can then trickle down to our company. These company-level changes influence our day-to-day work and the project itself. This is why we need to focus on these external factors. It's just about understanding the concept. You just need to grasp this idea. This broader perspective is sufficient. Next, let's look at the exam content. The final task on business environment, which is supporting organizational change. But why do we need change? Change can be tough and draining. More often than not, it's because the old ways and methods no longer work. It's not working like it used to. That's what's pushing us to make changes. When old methods fail, we need to adapt. Change must come from the top. That's the only way it'll work. Project managers can't really drive change themselves. But remember, think outside the box. While staying in your lane, your job is to lighten the load for your leaders. Now, let's examine how to support organizational change. The first step is to evaluate company culture. This means getting to know our company's current situation and values. Some company cultures embrace change, while others are more resistant to it. Some might have rigid hierarchies. It's crucial to grasp. First, we need to grasp our company's corporate culture. Then, we assess how organizational changes might impact our projects. Finally, we identify the required actions. For instance, if our company changes certain policies, we need to consider how it affects the projects we're working on. It's often a two-way street, though. Sometimes, it's the project itself that drives organizational changes. How to adapt for the next project, making adjustments step by step. The company slowly evolves, or it could be shifts in company policies. Once changes occur, projects are affected. Basically, we must grasp the details of these changes. Then, as team members, we determine all required actions and responsibilities. Alright, to conclude, evaluate the project's organizational impact and identify required actions. Look, the previous point was about how organizational change affects projects. Now we're looking at the reverse. It's a two-way street. Whether we're talking about how the company affects our project, or the effects of organizational changes, or how the project influences company-wide changes, we need to understand both sides. This actually encompasses the whole PMP Exam 7th edition. It introduces new change models. We'll cover these in detail later. These new change models. As for the exam's business environment section, it's covered at a high level. You just need a general grasp. If you study chapters 1 and 2 of our course thoroughly and get an overview of the rest, you'll cover most of the business environment topics required for the exam. First, we'll discuss the transformation of knowledge organization. Next, we'll evaluate the external environmental shifts. Third, we'll assess the project's benefits and value. Lastly, we'll conduct a compliance check. Alright, that wraps up our business environment section.